This year we checked a bucket list destination off of our list and took a cruise to the Mexican Riviera. And today, this is the good, bad, and ugly of Mexican Riviera Cruises.
JJ Cruise.
Hey everyone, what's up? My name is Jordan.
And I'm Jared.
And this is
JJ
JJ Cruise.
Cruise.
Thank you so much for clicking into the video today. Well, today we have a video that is packed full of information for you all about cruising on the West Coast. We took a 7-night cruise on Royal Caribbean's Navigator of the Seas, visiting Cabo San Lucas, Ensenada, and Puerto Vallarta, and we are here to tell you the good, bad, and ugly of these types of cruises.
But before we get into it, please subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and you can be a part of the first 100K of JJ Cruise. And while you're at it, hit that thumbs up. By the end of this video, we're going to tell you all of the essential information you need to know before going on your first Mexican Riviera cruise. We're going to include in that information everything from cruise tips to excursion information and our full honest review regarding Mexican Riviera cruises.
We will share the good, bad, and the ugly truth about this cruise itinerary, and hopefully you won't make some of the same mistakes that we made on board our first Mexican Riviera cruise.
Let's start out with the good, and there's a lot of good to be had with Mexican Riviera cruises. So who is a Mexican Riviera cruise for? We thought this might just be only for an older demographic. We see this with other cruises on the West Coast, whether it's Alaska cruises or even some of those West Coast cruises. But when coming to the Mexican Riviera, we saw demographics of all ages and all backgrounds. Now, when it came to families cruising, there was plenty of families. When there were grandparents or couples, you name it, that type of demographic was on board this cruise.
For the most part, these were people from North America, so people from Canada, the United States, and Mexico were on board the cruise. There was a large Spanish-speaking population, but that was not the majority of people on board.
Thinking about a Mexican Riviera cruise, you wouldn't think that the visuals would be as stunning as they really are. This was a true good for us because the view of the coastline was breathtaking. Truly gorgeous, including even when you're tendering at one of the ports, you have a view of some beautiful coastline, even if you don't get off the ship.
Because the sun sets in the west, you also are going to get the most beautiful sunsets that you will see on most cruises. I can say we've taken a lot of cruises in the Caribbean, and we really didn't see sunsets from a ship like we did on the West Coast. The sunsets and the scenery were absolutely gorgeous and deserve a very high place on the good section of our list. Another good to add to this list was the weather. Now, we've said that we went in mid-October, which is kind of off-season for traveling in the United States. For the first couple of days and the last couple of days of the trip, the weather was in the mid-60s, so that was perfect for us. You may need a light jacket or a sweatshirt if you're traveling later in the season, like December and January. But once we got to Mexico, it did warm up a little bit, and it was in the higher 70s, low 80s. In general, we loved the weather for this cruise. It was much better than most of the weather that you get in the Caribbean. And we would say that this would be a great cruise if you like things not too hot during the wintry seasons of December, January, and February.
This is also a great destination or itinerary for those that want to cruise during hurricane season. Of course, hurricanes still can happen on the West Coast, but they're less frequent than what you see in the Caribbean. One topic we have to talk about is safety, and it actually ends in the good category for our cruise. We, of course, have heard so many stories of Mexico being so unsafe, but what people don't know is most of these destinations on the West Coast for Mexican Riviera cruises are completely out of the danger zone. Now, of course, you always have to be prepared and travel safely like you do anywhere. But what we really loved is this is a good welcoming community, whether it be in Puerto Vallarta, Cabo San Lucas, or Ensenada, to really explore and have some local eats and some local places to shop, whether you're in the port area or outside in the local areas.
These areas are heavily populated with tourist places. They're places that are in transit kind of all year round, and we felt safe every single step of the way. So that's a question that we get often. Is it safe? And we would say, as long as you are a smart and savvy traveler, these are great destinations to visit while on your cruise. One of the things that we love to do when we go to international destinations is meet the locals. And we made it a point to mix and mingle with the locals at all of these destinations. Whether it be seeking out local food or going to local experiences, everyone that we encountered was extremely welcoming, helpful, and very kind. This kind of goes along with the safety point, but people in Mexico along the coast are some of the nicest people that you will encounter in cruise ports in general, and we couldn't recommend checking out the local scenes at these different places enough. You have to go check out the local eats and local people when you are on your Mexican Riviera cruise.
Along with this, most of the port areas are English speaking. Whether it's a secondary language or a third, it is truly a language that is understood by most of the people at these port areas. Another thing that is on our good list is the exchange rate. If you're coming from the US dollar to peso, which is the Mexican currency there, that exchange rate is in your favor. It's very positive. We see this from most currencies of the world right now for the big populations cruising to Mexico. So definitely a positive in our books.
We can't mention the good without talking about the food.
Oh, yes.
Now, if you are a Mexican food lover, this is going to be the cruise for you. In the Caribbean, we cruise to Mexico all the time and go to places like Cozumel and Costa Maya, but I will say this, the food on the West Coast in places like Cabo, Ensenada, Puerto Vallarta have the best eats all throughout the Mexican ports for cruising. We spent every single port stop, at least sometime, at restaurants, and we were filled to the brim with Mexican food during our time on this cruise. You have to eat the food when you are in Mexico.
And since this is coastal, there are some great seafood eats. Whether it's a fish taco or some other seafood entree, you are gonna love the seafood on the Mexican coast. When we're on our cruise, we love having a lot of options for excursions, especially local excursions. While on this itinerary, you have not a small amount to choose from. You have a plethora of options to choose from, whether on land or on water. In fact, for the water activities, you have everything from fishing to that of whale watching and even just relaxing on a catamaran. Whatever it is you want to do on water, you have as a choice for excursions, as well as on land, whether it's a food tour like a taco tour that we took, or if you want to go and explore the mountains in Puerto Vallarta, you have so many different options from relaxation to adventure when you're on your cruise.
One of the best parts about this is you don't really have to plan ahead. Of course, if there's an excursion that you really want to do, you should seek that out and pre-book it. But at every single stop, there was plenty of excursion booths right there to where you could walk off the ship in the morning, decide what you wanted to do day of, and then have a tour take you to that destination and bring you back to the ship. I think we booked our talker tour the night before through Viator, and it was within walking distance of the ship. So this is not a cruise that you have to heavily do a lot of lifting and planning. It's a pretty easy-going cruise that you can get your excursions along the way and really select and do a choose-your-own adventure once you get on board your Mexican Riviera cruise.
And our last good here is that this is a great year-round option to cruise. There are rarely cruises that are happening year-round that we would recommend because you either have a really bad season or a really good season and not both. Well, for Mexican Riviera Cruises, minus some heat in the summertime, you really have good options year-round. This is something that is rare and we definitely love and I think is underrated when talking about Mexican Riviera Cruises.
Now let's get into the bad, and stick around because we will have the ugly right after that. At the top of the bad list, kind of going along with what Jared just said about the heat, is going to be the heat in the summer. Now, a lot of destinations outside of Alaska are going to have a lot of heat in the summer. So just know this, when going to the Mexican Riviera, you still are in Mexico and it will be hot.
You need to stay hydrated with this heat. And so when it comes to hydration, you need water. While in Mexico, that is one thing that a lot of people in the United States, Canada, and some of these other areas are not used to the unfiltered water in Mexico. So of course, make sure you're getting filtered bottled water when you're at port. It may add some extra pesos out of your pocket, but it will be worth it when you don't have any kind of stomach issues later on in your cruise.
Speaking of pesos, you will need pesos. When you cruise the Caribbean, you often don't have to do any type of money exchanging because most ports will take USD or credit card. We would highly recommend taking some cash pesos with you on your Mexican Riviera cruise. It was actually a mistake that we made. We found ourselves without any pesos in a place that we had to have pesos. So I actually spent some time running around looking for an ATM to come back to the restaurant to pay, but pesos are key when taking a cruise to Mexico.
This is of course not needed in the port area, but we recommend going locally. So whether you're going to the Romantica zone in Puerto Vallarta or you're going past the port area in Cabo, you really want to get out there into these Mexican local restaurants to have those Mexican fine eats, and they may require pesos. And if they do take USD, it will be at a higher cost than if you had pesos in hand. We said in the good that English is widely spoken in the ports, but when you get past the ports, if you're going more locally for your eats, your shopping, your excursions, English might not be as widely seen or heard. That is why we have our top cruise tip, which is downloading the Google Translate app and then downloading the Spanish translations for English or whatever language you are speaking at home. So that way you have it without Wi-Fi. For a lot of people in the States, you might already have some data within your data plan, but just to be safe, it's always good to download the language of the country you're going to, and that is Spanish for Mexico.
If your cruise goes to Cabo San Lucas, there is not a pier that is large enough to hold cruise ships. What does this mean? This means that you will tender into port. That means that smaller ships take you from your cruise ship onto land. You often have to get a tender ticket if you're doing this, and tender tickets are called in groups. So let's say on your cruise ship, they'll say tender tickets start at 7 a.m. That means at 7 a.m. you better go to wherever they're giving tender tickets out to get your number to make sure that you can get on land early. If you don't wake up enough in time to get your tender ticket, and let's say you don't get your ticket till 9 or 10 a.m., you might not get off the ship until 1 o'clock. And then all aboard might be 3 or 4 o'clock, meaning you only have 2 hours on land. So the key tip here is, even though it's annoying and it falls on our bad list, wake up early to get a tender ticket to get on land early.
On top of that, if you have loyalty status with your cruise line, if you're high up in loyalty, check to see what options are available to see if you can bypass that whole process. This, of course, is only for those very high up in loyalty or suite guests, but this could be a big reason why you want to get a suite or have high loyalty with this cruise line. This next item on our bad list was not one that we actually projected happening. We actually thought this would be unlikely, but with Mexican Riviera Cruises, seasickness is actually very possible. And why this is because there's actually a lot more rocking and waves and motion in the ocean in the Mexican Riviera than you would ever think.
Quite a bit of rocking and motion on our cruise ship during the 7-night cruise. Thankfully, we didn't get seasick ourselves, but if you are going on a Mexican Riviera cruise, we'd recommend bringing some seasickness pills like Bonine or Dramamine, as well as you could get those wrist bracelets from a CVS or Walgreens.
C-bands, I think they're called.
C-bands, yep, C-bands, or the little patches behind your ears. There's a lot of different things you can prepare for, but definitely bring those on board your cruise to avoid missing any of the fun on board your Mexican Riviera cruise.
The number one tip with seasickness is booking midship. If you book that cabin midship, you'll have less problems overall, but very good points for all seasickness. That was the bad. Now it's time for our ugly. And honestly, this ugly is one that has happened on other cruise itineraries, but I think it's happening here more and more. But the good news is there is a fix. This ugly is the short days at port. And when we mean short days, they're not just 2 hours long by any means, but they're shorter than you really want. For example, there are some amazing mountains to be had in the Puerto Vallarta region that you may not be able to go and adventure into if your days at port are too short. We found this on our cruise, whether it's Cabo San Lucas or Ensenada or PV, Puerto Vallarta. We really saw all three of them to be, 6 or 7 hours at port. and that just wasn't enough time to do as much as we wanted to do at each of these ports.
I think the cruise lines have heard this complaint a lot from people because in 2025, this is changing, at least with Royal Caribbean. Now, on a lot of cruise itineraries in 2025, Ovation of the Seas is going to Cabo overnight. This is not all of their Cabo itineraries, but there's quite a few on the list that you could book for 2025. We think that this is great because Cabo not only has a lot of areas to explore, it has incredible nightlife. So this is very exciting for the city of Cabo as well as for Royal Caribbean, and it immediately fixes this big ugly or this big complaint that we had about our cruise.
Overall, would we sail on a Mexican Riviera cruise again? Yes. In fact, this is the most underrated cruise itinerary in North America. We all hear the greats of Alaska cruises. We know New England cruises are wonderful. Bermuda and Caribbean are so talked about it all the time on YouTube. This is the one itinerary that is truly not talked about enough, and we don't understand why, especially after taking our first cruise.
We loved this cruise, and if you want to book your Mexican Riviera cruise, please reach out to us. Go over to jjcruise.com and fill out our interest form. If you want to book your cruise, we're both travel agents and we would be happy to help you get on board a Mexican Riviera cruise. Well, thank you so much for watching again. My name is Jordan.
And I'm Jared.
And until next time, see ya.